Yes, good afternoon, everybody, and welcome to um, BA360 International Business once again. I thought I'd go ahead and I've got just a little bit of a quick week lecture here that I'm going to go ahead and kind of go through for basically chapters 1 and 2, and just talk you through some of the points here that we're looking at. So when we start to look at international business and global trade, so there could be a number of things that we could be looking at. So, um, first of all, just looking at the globe as a whole here as we take a look at it, and you can see that over here you have the Western, you get the Western US, and you get South America, you've got Europe, Asia, okay, over here, Australia, and then the continent of Africa. And some of those kind of overlap. And you'll see that there is kind of where you're looking at the credit. This one particular slide talks about the credit crisis, and a couple of these countries that have some real issues with credit that basically impacts the rest of the world. But we'll explore that a little bit later. But just kind of looking at the map, and you'll see kind of what people are looking for. So globalization is kind of it's the, as the term says here, it's a way of looking at the world which eliminates trade, investment, cultural, technology issues across other countries. It's designed to really kind of boost growth and kind of a geopolitical integration or interdependence among the nations of the world. It used to be called Americanization or Westernization, mainly Westernization, looking at Europe and Western Europe, and Americanization obviously deriving from America, but it's not so much just that anymore. It's literally across the whole spectrum of countries. So it's really talking about an integrated economy. So when you're looking at the entire world here, and you've got kind of what we call the old world countries, okay? Old world countries are the United States and Eastern Europe, which are those are what we call the old world, or actually in a lot of countries, they're also called first world. And then what you've got are some emergent countries, as you can see here, and this is what we call the BRIC, okay? And when you're looking at those, these are the up and coming economies of the world. Some are growing faster than others. Obviously, the BRIC we have, it stands for Brazil, Russia, China, and India, okay? And not in that order, but and depending on where you're looking at and who you talk to, emerging is there is some segregation within there. If you look at Russia and Brazil, they've slowed over the past few years, where China and India have really taken off. Where you're looking at these economies now as they're also importing and exporting pretty significantly. China obviously exports way more than it imports. India also has an export more in the service economy. And there is a smaller amount. South Africa's kind of been in there as well. And so sometimes you'll see this as BRICS if they include South Africa. But South Africa has had some political turmoil recently, which kind of we'll have to wait and see how that plays out on their rise through the global trade market. So, and then what you have after the emergence is you have kind of the third world countries. And these are all these countries in Africa. Some of these countries you've got Iran, Afghanistan, Pakistan, Mongolia, all these other countries here. Also, these ones that are here, you're in the southern of the Arabian Peninsula there, which are called, they're very impoverished nations. We also have over here, okay, the countries of Chile, Argentina, you got here Peru, Colombia, Venezuela, and all these other countries here. They're what they're calling the they're more of the again, a little bit more third world countries. And if you ever took the global experience, you would and you go to one of the South American countries, you're going to really start to see some of those areas where things that we take for granted aren't there. The same in Africa in a lot of places, not in all places, but in a lot of places. So trade is not real prevalent in those areas as far as on the global scale, because they don't import much and they can't export much. And we'll get into those a little bit more as we move along. These are just talking about those. Emerging economies are the ones that are competing everywhere for everything. They're looking at becoming the economic centers, hopefully at some point in the future. Now, as I said, some of those, as we look back here, some of those countries, Brazil and Russia, may be falling back a little bit more than some of the other countries. South Africa is kind of in the middle of that, and India and China, and even India is predicted to outrun China here, if you look at most of the studies. Okay, so when you look at now is some of these things that impact world trade as we go through this, as you look at, they're called World Trade Agreements, okay, by the World Trade Organization, which is an organization that kind of oversees all global trade. And what they're looking to do is, are these 5 things on the right-hand side here. You've got trade without discrimination, increasingly free trade, okay, predictability of trading relationships, promotion of fair competition, and encouragement of economic reforms in developing countries. So, trade without discrimination means that you're basically out there, and one country is not going to favor over another. So it doesn't matter whether you're trading, the U.S. trades with pretty much everybody who wants to trade with us. But in some other countries that may not be so, like Iran, for instance, right now is prohibited from trading with a lot of countries outside of maybe Russia and a couple of others who are not parts of these trade agreements. Then we'll go down to predictability of trading relationships. That's the understanding that there is a relationship working between the different countries, and exactly how that works. Promotion of fair competition is kind of self-explanatory, and encouragement of economic reforms in developing countries. So those developing countries that are out there, those South American, those third world countries is what we call them, they're trying to encourage the reforms on things like fair trade. So along with increasingly fair trade, they kind of go hand in hand a little bit there. For instance, paying a fair wage for coffee. Starbucks is big on that. They're out there sourcing only things that are equitable, and they're paying a decent amount for that coffee, so those people can live and not taking advantage of those third world countries. So these are kind of the winners in that situation, right? At the global trade market right now, you've got China, India, and Brazil. Those are the big ones, mainly China and India at the moment. And then you get the real losers, which are Central Asia, most of Africa, North Korea. Okay, and those are kind of there. A lot of those have some geopolitical issues that are definitely associated with those. Much of Africa doesn't have a super stable government structure, making trade a little bit more difficult. North Korea, obviously for many reasons, is definitely going to be a global leader, loser. And those are definitely in Central Asia, or those are countries along the lines of Iran, Afghanistan, to a certain extent Pakistan, and some of those Southeast Asia countries But Central Asia definitely is more of those Iran, Iraq, Afghanistan, some of those countries on the southern Arabian Peninsula, and the Middle East, which is Jordan and a couple of those. Again, highly unstable governments, highly unstable geopolitical situations, just doesn't make them really viable for trade. So when we look at as we look at these, we're going to kind of use those. These are kind of a few generic terms that we're going to take a look at as we go through here. International business is obviously the commercial transaction, both private and public, between the nations of the world. So anywhere where commerce is happening, whether it's public or private. Trade is two-way flow. That's just the flow of goods, imports, exports, and services. For instance, in India, we know that it's a high service economy. So a lot of our customer service call centers are based in India. And then foreign direct investment, which is the inflow of capital for investing in domestic plants and equipment for the production of goods and services. There are many firms that will actually go to China and build through a partnership agreement. And there's a couple of complex issues there that would actually build, they build a plant there. Or to build some, one of the other examples I use in the management class is a company close to, very similar to REI, the sporting goods company. They actually go in and build their own company because they want to control all the quality aspects of it. So they will actually pour direct investment. As we get into a couple of the discussion questions, you'll see, and some of the other topics in there about going and buying farms, for instance, directly in foreign countries is another topic that's a little more of a hotbed topic. But it is also foreign direct investment, but sometimes that works at a disadvantage to the host country. So we have purchase power parity is another term. This is kind of a term, and the way to remember this is the way I used to always remember this particular concept, which is basically it's the theoretical exchange rate that allows you to buy the same amount of goods and services in every country that you're out there. So if you you compare, it's easy for us in the U.S. to compare the Big Mac or any fast food institution with the cost that's going to cost to live there. For instance, when I spent 3 months in Switzerland, never bought a Big Mac because it was like $13. Even though the exchange rate of money was pretty even between the Swiss franc and the US dollar. But the cost of a Big Mac there, for many reasons, was much higher than it would be in the States. So now it's $6, $7 here in the States. But but when you take a look at it and going forward a little bit, it's it's $6, $7 in the States. At that point, it was $13, $14 in Switzerland. So you've got that aspect of almost double. So things there, the cost to live there, even though the money exchange was even, the cost to live there was pretty, would have been pretty expensive. Now, if you take a look at that as opposed to the Czech Republic, where it was one of the places I visited, where the exchange rate was, the purchase power and parity was the other way. U.S. dollar to the Kronos, which is their money system, was pretty good. In other words, you got a lot of Kronos for the U.S. dollar. But when you went into the country, things were cheap because you basically the purchase of power parity there was you could go buy into a 4-star hotel for what we would pay for a budget hotel here. It's just the scale of, it's that formula that we use, which is to level out the goods and services in other countries and how they work there. And they do that to compare a little bit about compare how the cost of living is there and how it can input trade. So the next, as we take a look here, okay, these are the 10 largest economies in the world: the United States, China, and this is 2012. So I'd say the chunk of the pie that the US has is probably less now, or about, it's either the same or less. And I'd have to look that up to be absolutely certain, but China has definitely expanded along with India. Because again, this just chart and data is from a few years ago. So, but you can kind of get an idea of how it works. So again, this is on a PPP basis. So it's leveling it out. So the rest of the world typically is all these smaller countries, but you take a look at the top 10, you have, Italy, basically Britain, Brazil, France, Russia, Germany, Japan, and India are all in the same ballpark. And then you've got China and the US. But I think India is actually more than 5.5% now. I'm pretty sure that's going to be a little higher than that. But it kind of gives you a little bit of a graphic of understanding how the countries are in the world of trade, okay? So, and which is gross net income, is basically based on the PDP. So then it explains there, the definition is obviously the net receipts of employee compensation and property income from abroad. So we take a look at a couple of things here on the benefits of trade. You have a greater amount of goods, choice in the availability of goods and services. Okay, obviously you can, because you can get the Walmart line of quality, or you can get the Target line of quality, or you can get the Neiman Marcus line of quality. And each one of those is going to be slightly different. But if you had to make all those in the US, then everything would actually be the same level, whatever that would end up to be, whether that's a Target level or it's a Neiman Marcus level, but it would be all the same level depending on the country. And you've got competition results in lower prices for goods and services, okay? So more competition definitely drives the price down. So you've got some avenues there where you can actually pull those in. Increased quality of life and higher living standards, you would hope for both countries, but it doesn't always work that way. Okay, and this kind of gives you a little bit about the exports, and visual on the exports. Okay, we do still, even though and imports would be side by side with this, and we import, right now our balance of trade is a negative, so we import more than we export. And you notice that the exports, we export roughly 8% of the world's trade. China exports 11%. Germany is right up there with the US at 8%. And then you got the other ones kind of, if you look at it, there's some interesting players there. And obviously now Hong Kong would be rolled into China, so that would be closer probably to 15 or 16% in the export category. But you got Italy, Russia, and again, these are going to be dollars and percentages there. So so you have some countries that are a little bit unusual, right? You're not seeing Britain there, for instance, or the United Kingdom. They actually import more than they export, way more. They're in the I think they're in the 20s as far as how much they actually import over the export, which brings us up some interesting things when we talk about Brexit and what their withdrawal from the British Union. So just taking a look at kind of a comparison. Again, this is 2012. There are some other studies out now that kind of indicate that China obviously would have at least probably 14 or 15% now, because Hong Kong is now part of China. as you can tell from the way, well, actually the way China is treating Hong Kong. Okay, so you have three basic aspects of or theories of international trade. Mercantilism, which is just what we usually, I call this is the gold standard. The premise that a country can only gain from external trade if it has a trade surplus. So the part of mercantilism basically is if you're not making a profit in the trade world, you're then that's the only way that they could gain. Now, the other aspect of this, you have major theory is specialization. Free trade encouraged countries to specialize in products of goods and services that they most effectively produce. If you look at most of our clothes these days, they're either made in some Southeast Asian country or China. And that's because that's what they do well. Electronics are either in Japan or China. Again, because they have the materials that can make those things work. And so they specialize in those. Now, the other aspect or theory of this is factor endowments, which is a national primary exports and services that intensely use abundant factors of production. So this is the last one is where a nation is going to look at what basically they're going to export things that they intensely use in their factors of production. So again, go back to the clothes example. You've got those nations that are specializing in clothing, they don't necessarily make the thread. So they're importing the thread and then they're making it. So that's kind of what a factor endowment is, as opposed to specialization is the goods and services. Whereas the factor endowments is where they can, it's all done inside the country. So things like coffee, for instance, in the coffee producing countries, their resources are all in that country. Whereas the specialization would be free trade, specialized in production of goods and services. So back to the clothing example, they'll make the clothing, but they don't make the string. So some other country will make the threads, and then they're shipped into that country. So that can be a specialization, whereas a factor endowment, everything's right there. Okay, so a couple of quick things on the on absolute and comparative advantage. Now, these are two specializations that are a basis for trade. So an absolute advantage is the ability of one country to produce it more efficiently than another. Okay. So China can more efficiently produce clothes than, say, the US. Not excluding quality, but the ability, they can produce that one good much better. The service would be India is able to more efficiently handle customer service. Okay. Whereas a comparative advantage has the ability of one country to have an absolute advantage in production of two or more goods or services, to produce one relatively more efficient than the other. So those would be on comparative advantages. You're actually comparing the actual production of two or more products, and they are again making them more efficiently. You don't see too many absolute advantages that we talk about, but we definitely talk a lot about comparative advantage, because that's how business is done. There's a reason why car parts are produced in Mexico and then shipped over the border and made in the US, because they have a comparative advantage over there, because they can produce them at the same quality level as the US, but it costs way less. Just giving you a little bit of the rundown on the diamond of national competitive advantage. So you kind of look at all the factors that kind of roll into this. So you've got chance, which is in that bigger outer ring. You've got government, which kind of flows into that in that center ring in the background there. Both chance and government are two things that you really can't control a whole lot of in business. So they kind of are the underlying factors of the structure of competitive advantage. And then you look at competitive advantage from these other aspects, things like firm strategy, firm strategy structure. Are they able to quickly recover? Think of Google in the early days. They could quickly respond to a whole lot of different things because they were nimble. Not so nimble anymore, but they were then. And then you've got demand conditions, things like there's a demand for the iPhone. So Apple has that kind of built-in pent-up demand. So that can always kind of weigh into a competitive advantage because there's demand for their product. Related and supporting industries, those are things that can, if you're making car parts, you obviously want to make them for a manufacturer, or for a car manufacturer. So you want to make sure that car manufacturers going to make sure that they can make all these goods and services outsourced, and that's where outsourcing comes in. Those factor conditions, again, it's more the availability of raw materials. Okay, and then these are a little bit more on those aspects of international trade organizations that are out there. We have the International Monetary Fund, the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade, that's the GATT, which is also the one that came out of where the World Trade Organization was born. And you have the World Bank. I've got a couple of videos coming up next week that you'll see that'll really go into the depth of the World Bank and the International Monetary Fund and how they work together and are interrelated. They're pretty good. So, okay, these are the different ways that you can that countries will look at controlling inbound goods on imports. Okay, so you've got the first thing you got is tariff, which basically they're called duties, custom duties on imports. Realistically, it's a tax to bring those things into the country. A specific tariff is one that's so that's a general tariff. Then you have a specific tariff, which is to import a tax that's a fixed dollar amount per physical unit. So maybe you're adding $3 per toy that's coming in from China. An ad valorem tax, okay, or tariff, excuse me, is a tax on imports that's levied at a consistent percentage of monetary value of 1 unit. So the specific tariff is a dollar amount. The ad valorem is a percentage. Preferential duties. So an import tariff that's so you have a country that might have most favored nation status or something, and where they're importing something, so the tariff may be a little lower, or it may be higher if you're trying to inhibit trade from those countries. And then you have the generalized system of preferences, the GSP, which is an agreement where a large number of developed countries permit duty-free imports of selected products from specific countries. So things like we have and this is where you get things that come out of like NAFTA and the newer version of that. Can't think of the acronym right now, but basically it's the newer version, the renegotiated one from Trump. And then you've got those things kind of roll in. And then you have the last of this is a taxes on exports, which is an export subsidy and an export tax. So an export subsidy is basically a tax break or a reduction in taxes, if you want to look at it that way, on anything that's going out. Export taxes means that it's more expensive to export that, to send that to another country. And then these are non-tariff barriers that would come into play. Import quotas, that's a numbers restriction. Voluntary export restraint, which is that limits the number of products that can be going to another country for a temporary period, such as us limiting exports to Iran or Afghanistan because of the turmoil that's going on there. And then basically domestic content provisions. This is one that's coming back into play a little bit more with the concept of nationalism, where it's regulations that a certain percentage of the value of an import can only be sourced domestically. So if you're building a car, then you have to have a certain percentage of that car that's actually of the parts that are manufactured in the United States. So you're starting to see that come around with nationalism again. All right, I know I kind of went through this kind of quickly over the last 30 minutes, but hopefully this will help you out and clear up a few things. And if you know, please feel free to reach out and we can kind of take a look at it.